I spent days, many long late nights, working on that sequence. And
what's your favorite part about being a photo editor at a publication like the New York Times?
And then it just kind of turned into this obsession almost again. Like I found myself really, as I often get into things that I was like, I really enjoy this.
It's a modern day Finnish Ernst Haas. It was. I think the book is absolutely beautiful.
If you're really passionate about photography, just pour your heart and soul into it. Speaking to a young person just starting out, I think it's important to.
Welcome to the Camera Doesn't Matter podcast. I'm your host, Sean Gallagher. Here on the podcast, we go beyond the equipment to focus on what's truly important in photography. The photographer's vision, their voice, and their perspective on the world and what that reveals to us through their images and their stories. I'm speaking to some of the best photographers and photojournalists in the world to go behind their images and find out the stories about how they make their photos and what you can learn from their processes and their thoughts about photography. With that in mind, I'm really happy to welcome today's guest. Mikko Takkunen is a photographer and photo editor for the New York Times. And I've known Mikko for quite a long time. I'm really happy and really interested to get his thoughts about photography and also his new book about Hong Kong, which we're going to be talking about later on in the podcast. So Mikko, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks for having me.
So currently you're a photo editor. I was wondering, for those who aren't familiar with the mysterious world of photo editing, could you describe a day in the life of a photo editor and what a photo editor actually does?
Well, I'm a photo editor on the international desk at the New York Times. We have a half a dozen photo editors in our team, and I oversee our Africa, Arabian Peninsula, Afghanistan, and Pakistan photography, and it really means working with kind of the text editors covering those regions, and then obviously the correspondents. So, majority of our stories come from the text side. A correspondent will reach out, or their editor will reach out that we're thinking of getting into Sudan, and then it's my job to assess if we want to assign original photography for such a story, and Sudan is an actual example from like 2 months ago that our chief Africa correspondent Declan Walsh was going to Sudan, and then I assigned photographer Ivor Prickett to join him, and then it's working with the photographer during the assignment, and then when it comes time to kind of actually do we have a draft, and then to actually then just select the best, most suitable images, most relevant images to the story, and which go online and later in the newspaper. And I mean, those are the kind of bigger stories. I mean, it means selecting sometimes using news agency images like Reuters, Getty or AP. But like at the times, we're fortunate that we can assign a lot of regional photography, and there's all sorts of also of course all different kinds of stories, but I certainly very much enjoy when I get to work on stories that really have touch upon interesting important current affairs and news issues, and then really making sure that those important stories are also strong visually, it's working with those correspondents and photographers and editors and text editors, and then producing strong. Ideally, the goal is to produce a very strong visual journalism for the New York Times coverage and international report.
So I've just brought up on screen a little example from one of the pages on the New York Times website, just to give people an idea of some of the stories that you cover. I think, for most people, most laymen or amateur photographers, they don't realize that there's this extra layer of photo editors at these publications that are making these decisions, so that when you pick up a newspaper or when you open up a website, there's this huge process that goes into editing the pictures from assignments and then choosing the best ones. I think from speaking to a lot of amateur photographers and aspiring professionals, I think they find editing as one of the hardest parts of photography. So to learn about this specialist role of photo editors, I think it can be really important for, you know, all levels of photographers, because it's such a crucial role, isn't it? Because you must get, like on a typical assignment, you must get thousands of photos, hundreds and maybe thousands of photos.
Yeah, it depends. But it's often, you know, from a week, you know, for instance, like this recent Sudan assignment that lasted for 3 weeks, I probably got like a couple hundred images. I mean, some photographers might have actually filed a lot more. We don't ask like a whole take. We don't ask a raw file. So I know that some publications, like I've heard, like National Geographic, you might have to actually ship the whole hard drive with all the raw images. We don't do that. So we do let photographers to kind of make the initial selection. Of course, sometimes we might ask, like, you know, can I see a bit more from this scene? And you know, and some photographers file a lot wider, and some are very selective, and then we might have to nudge, like, can we actually get a bit more? But like, you know, from a, you know, a day assignment, usually like, you know, 20-30 images, and then, you know, obviously, you know, you add the days, and then, you know, the number goes up pretty quickly. You know, 200 or something images from 3 weeks is probably on the low side. But it was really, it's then, you know, typical, like even a visual heavy story might get like 15 images. I mean, 20 would be quite a lot. So it's like, obviously it's a, you know,
I mean, it must be a
very hard selection of like selecting, you know, selecting what are those 15 to 20 images that you will use, that we will use.
It must be really fascinating seeing all those, you know, different images coming through. I wonder, what's your favorite part about being a photo editor at a publication like the New York Times?
Well, I enjoy. I mean, I enjoy. Usually, like the actual assigning is pretty smooth. There's a lot of regulars or contributors that is often quite. That's kind of a pretty smooth process, and obviously we're also trying to find new talent. But what I mean, I enjoy, you know, kind of collaborating with photographers and you know, talking with them, you know, being in touch during the assignment, and so on. But like, I think the part that I very much enjoy enjoy the most is the actual editing. That then when I have the, you know, often I find, like, you know, my job is to assign the photography, make sure that the photographer has all the information and all the resources to do their job as to the best of the best they can. But then often, if it's not a risky assignment, I just kind of let them do this, you know, do the job, and then I come back to the process when we have a draft, and then I start, you know, kind of I always, of course, read the stories very carefully. I make notes, you know, what things I could imagine being important visually, and then I start going through the photos, and it's really, I love the visual puzzle that I'm always working on. That, like, you know, what are the key images? What is the, you know, what is the opening image? What do we call, like, the top art? What's the photograph that I think people should see first, and then you know, what feels like the right number for the story, and also then you know, how I'm gonna kind of, is this gonna be like, you know, groups of 2 or 3 images at a time, or are there going to be some grids, or like, what's the best way to show it, or, you know, or some sort of fader. Really the visual puzzle of, like, you know, taking a 2,000-3,000 word story, and then taking the big stack of images, narrowing it down, and then even when you get to that certain number, you know, I often set myself a kind of a target number. Like, I think this feels like 50. I mean, it's not like anything set in stone, but I kind of like to help me work, kind of helps my process to kind of set the target process, and then when I get to the kind of the close enough to the number where I want to be, then I start thinking like what how I'm gonna put this, how do I sequence it, and how do I show it best. And I really enjoy that process. And it sometimes involves back and forth also with obviously my I sometimes with my colleagues, or sometimes with also I might show it to some the photographers too, and see if they have some thoughts. But obviously the final decision is kind of mine, and I always I have to be able to take full responsibility of it. But and but that visual, as I like to call it, visual puzzle, the best part of the job. And then obviously at the times our stories can have or often have very wide reach, and it's exciting to see when kind of story makes waves, that it's noticed. Like when we, for instance, published this the Sudan story by Declan Walls and Ivor Prickett, that there was interest from BBC interviewing them, because hardly any Western journalists had gotten into Sudan. And then also other publications were interested in licensing some of those images, and it's it kind of keeps you on your toes when that our stories have a lot of eyeballs. And also, of course, any mistakes can be very visible, and
of course.
so you have to be very careful. Obviously, if we ever do make errors, we own up to those, and
Do you feel like photo editing is a kind of an underappreciated art form? Because I think I've developed an appreciation for it more and more over the years. And like I said, I love the way you put it, like it's a visual puzzle when you're thinking about sequencing and what images go with the words. And I think it's kind of like a little bit of a mysterious art form for most photographers, but also a little bit underappreciated, because like you said, it's something that is so important, but maybe most people don't think about.
Yeah, I mean, I think in certain extent, yes. I think people, when I tell people that I meet people at non kind of like photo events, and they'll tell them that I'm a photo editor, and they immediately think that I'm like moving pixels on Photoshop, and that's what I do. I hardly ever even touch Photoshop, and if I do, it's to change the size of the file or something like that. But
sure.
I think the wider public don't probably have a brilliant understanding. But I think even in journalism, I do think that to a certain extent, photo editors probably are a bit kind of under-recognized. I mean, all credit obviously to photographers for what they do and what they, the images they make. But I do think that a good photo editor, if I do my job well, I can really take the body of work to a higher level. And often it's also working with stories that are not very visual, and just what I like to think is that my job is to just try to make an impact with the images, and it can sometimes be a matter of like just almost choosing the least bad images, but and this is I'm talking about very tough stories to art. But when it comes to our own original photography, it's really, I think photo editor can kind of if I do a bad job, I could really miss some of those key images, and obviously I would do a great disservice to the photographer's job. Not only the photographer's work, but also the story as a whole. But but I'd like to think that I'm experienced enough to know, most of the time at least, to really heighten the the overall result. And in my opinion, not a lot of photographers aren't necessarily the best editors of their own work, and
that's fair to say. I think that's a fair comment.
And photo editors are a very important part in kind of really looking at the work objectively, kind of ignoring the circumstances where the images were made. By this I mean that photographers, and being kind of photographer myself, I know that I sometimes get emotionally attached to certain images just because of what happened, what occurred when I was making that image. But that doesn't necessarily translate to the actual photograph that the the reader sees. And as obviously as a photo editor, I wasn't there when the photograph was made, and I think kind of look at the images a bit more objectively than the photographers themselves. But that said, I think it's also important to hear the photographers and kind of like um, um, have let them have a say, not on the edit itself, but but to
Sure.
kind of like what do you think the key images are, or like I think a lot of the photographers that we work with are great journalists, and I think um, it's not just that they file and then they're ignored.
Yeah, it's that collaboration, isn't it?
Yeah,
That's really important. I found that as a photographer, working with a good photo editor can really help make your story a lot more powerful. Like you said, because you have that objective viewpoint on your story. Because as a photographer, you can become very attached to photos. And I was having this conversation with one of my mentees who I'm coaching just yesterday, saying how you have to be ruthless with your editing and having someone with that that objective pair of eyes to help you pick out, not just pick out the best story, the best images, but also to help you find that narrative in a story, is why we need people like yourself, photo editors.
I agree.
But actually, you're not just a photo editor, which is what I mainly want to talk about today on the podcast. Actually, I want to talk about your other life as a photographer, and we'll come on to your new book about Hong Kong in a moment. But I kind of just want to take a kind of a step back and help people get a little bit more of an understanding about your background in photography and kind of what's kind of led you on your quite unique career path up to now. Because at the beginning of your career, you actually started as a photographer. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. I kind of came into photography very late. I actually left Finland I'm originally from Finland, and I left Finland in my early 20s to study international relations in Scotland. And it was during that time that I kind of started dabbling with photography, but I was mostly just like taking photographs, as a hobby when we went hiking or, to concerts with friends and so on. But it was one of my friends showed me the war photographer documentary about James Nathway, which kind of really blew my mind. Obviously I was consuming a lot of news. I was reading story, news, but I wasn't. But somehow it never really occurred that there was this thing called photojournalism that really kind of combined in a way both of my then interest, current affairs, and international affairs and photography. And when I saw that war photography documentary, I kind of started teaching. I was still studying international relations, but I kind of on the side I started teaching myself, reading about photojournalism and reading, well-known biographies and looking at some of Salgado's works and Nathway's work. And so actually when I graduated from the international relations degree in Scotland, I ended up on the same summer. I ended up enrolling on a photojournalism degree in Swansea, Wales, and it was like I felt very strongly that actually this is what I want to do. And so during that, after graduating from Wales, I moved to England, first to Brighton and then to England, and to London, and I started working as a photographer, mostly for the Scandinavian press. I guess with my Finnish background, I was working a lot with the Britain correspondent of the Helsingin Sanomat newspaper, which is the big kind of Finnish national daily, and some other Scandinavian publications, I did that for a couple of years, but it was kind of, I was doing a lot of kind of very quick assignments, not necessarily kind of the photojournalism that I had envisioned doing like internationally, or it was more like a lot of portraits, which I didn't really feel was kind of something that I felt so comfortable. Like I'd never felt comfortable like directing people, I always kind of wanted to be more of an observer, and which was sometimes difficult on these very quick assignments. So I was photographer for a couple of years, but then in 2013 I I moved to the editing side, and pretty much.
So I'm just going to bring
Yeah.
up on the screen here. This is Photojournalism Links, which is how I got to know you originally. Now, this on screen, this is the page as it existed on the Time magazine website. But just taking a step back, Photojournalism Links, can you tell us a little bit more about that website that you set up?
Yeah,
Because
sure.
I kind of feel that was basically the beginning of your editing career.
No,
And
absolutely.
it's quite a unique starting point for this career, this very successful career that you've had in editing. Can you tell us a little bit more about what Photojournalism Links was, and how important that was for you?
Sure. I mean, yeah, it's very much, I think, what led me to photo editing, and it gave me kind of my break in it. So basically, when I started, it was 2006. I started my photojournalism course in Swansea, and I think it was like a year after my second year there, I started. I was always looking at trying to see what was the best photojournalism published online, and then I thought like, well, I'm doing all this kind of searching that maybe I could put it in a blog. So I created this. I got myself the domain Photojournalism Links, and I started, posting daily all these, stuff that I saw in the Time magazine or New York Times and Nat Geo, Guardian, and so on, Newsweek. And I wanted to share it with people, and yeah, it was kind of like it's found its somehow it found an audience in our industry, and it was quite exciting then that I was still like this photojournalism student, but I started hearing back from from people who were very established photographers, and they would even send me links sometimes, like I published this, if you want to take a look, and it was.
I think I was one of those photographers as well.
And I did that for kind of like 5 years on my own, posting pretty much daily, and I guess it was kind of, Twitter didn't quite exist in that way then yet, and Facebook, so it was like, and Instagram certainly didn't exist, and so it ended up, Photojournalism Links ended up being this blog where people kind of came together and tried to see like what was photojournalism getting published around the world, and I was also including stuff from non-English speaking media, and so I had met Time magazine photo editor in Perpignan and Pisha Purlima's Photojournalism Festival, and then I think year after he reached out to me saying that time.com, they're like the online side of Time magazine, was looking for a junior photo editor if I knew somebody who would be interested, and I was like,
me.
I would be interested, and they did require like 3 years of kind of newsroom experience, which is quite quite usual even with junior like photo editor jobs, and nowadays often it's even more, might be even 5 years, but it turned out that that the director of photography at Time magazine, Kira Pollack, liked Photojournalism Links, and she was willing to entertain the idea of at least consider me for the job, and so it kind of like, from this blogging, I turned into photo editor. I mean, obviously I was very much tested. They gave me like editing tasks to kind of see if I was the real deal, and I could really edit, be given a story, and be able to edit it, show like what were in my mind the best images. And I think I needed to, like, it was end of 2012, so I think I had to do like my top 10 photos of 2012 and so on, and yeah, I got the job. And then beginning of 2013, I started first at the time.com offices in London, and then later on in the year I moved to New York, and pretty much overnight, I kind of packed my cameras, and I felt like I wanted to try to be the best photo editor I could be, and not kind of try to compete with photographers who I might even be editing or so on, and I kind of started my career on the editing side, and that's what I'm basically doing still and then when I joined time.com, they actually asked that, they had this then their own photography blog called Lightbox, and they asked if I would,
Sure.
happy to continue doing Lightbox photojournalism links on their Lightbox blog, which I did during my, the 2.5 years, 3 years at time, until end of 2015. I then joined the New York Times.
I think it's such a fascinating path that you took, and it's really important for people listening and watching to learn that, you started your photo editing career basically on your own, just out of this genuine passion you had for kind of curating photography and photojournalism, and the opportunities just happened to present themselves. The right people saw, photojournalism links, and it is kind of sprouted into this career as a photo editor. It's certainly not a traditional path that most people would
not
think
at all.
you'd have to take to become a photo editor.
Yeah, and I kind of get the sense that there's in creative fields, there are nowadays more of these kind of unusual paths that is not always, or even photography or photojournalism in general isn't like, a degree and then you just it's not a job like just any other job, I don't think, but it's certainly, I think that, probably a more traditional path would have been to, first be photo editing in a student paper, and then maybe a regional paper, and then a national paper before, starting in one of the biggest magazines in the world, which Time was back then, and at least on obviously I started on the online side, but yeah, it was a big step, and I had never even I had never really had an office job, and
Sure.
I'd been basically, I spent most of my 20s in university doing 2 degrees, and then I worked as a freelance photographer for a couple of years, but then actually moved, starting at a big company and really doing work that was, potentially seen around the world. It was, a big step.
A big step, a really big
many
step.
ways, yeah.
And at that point, were you taking any pictures at all, or had you kind of left the world of actually taking pictures kind of behind you?
I was just
put
kind
your
of
cameras away.
Yeah, I was really only taking photographs, not just like anybody else with the phone, nothing serious. I wasn't, I literally sold all my professional cameras, and
Okay.
I stopped completely. I don't know. I was somehow the idea of like people. I always felt like I would be so judged if I kind of tried to do both of those things. But in some, on hindsight, maybe it was a bit of a silly way of thinking. But that's kind of how I thought then. And also, I can be quite narrow-minded, and I feel like when I really get into something, I kind of just try to focus on that and try to do. I felt like I wanted to try to be the best photo editor I could be, and trying to photo edit on the side, which is kind of to try to do my own photography on the side would be just a kind of distraction.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think there's a lot to be said for that, for just focusing in on what you want to try and be the best at, which in your case was photo editing. And so I suppose that what led to the transition between you were working for Time in the US, and then you went to Asia, and you found yourself in Hong Kong.
Yeah, so I was very eager to join the New York Times because I felt like I could see that they were really producing in my mind, the best photojournalism out there, and a lot of original work, very strong work. Whereas I could kind of see that, sadly, like Time magazine wasn't really assigning photojournalism in the way it used to. And I was mostly, did a bit of work on the magazine side, but I was especially on the online side. It was mostly dealing with news agency images, and which, editing that is important too. But it wasn't, I think I really wanted to get my hands on like assigning original work and kind of making work happen from scratch. And I felt like, the place to do that was the New York Times. So, they were looking for photo editors, for the kind of an Asia editor for the international desk, and then Asia headquarters in Hong Kong. And I applied and I got it. And and I had never
What
spent
an
any.
opportunity! That must have been an
Yeah,
incredibly exciting
it
time for
was
you.
it was incredibly exciting and terrifying too.
I'm sure.
And I'd never set my foot anywhere in the continent, and um, I joined the Times at the beginning of December 2015, and I was kind of
Mhm.
I was with the international picture editors in New York for 3 months to kind of like tagging along and also kind of
Help
editing
you
stories and
ease into it.
ease
Yeah,
into, yeah.
yeah.
And then after 3 months or so, then they were like, okay, now it's time to head to Asia, and time to head to Hong Kong, and I literally started on the job day after we got there, and I was there for 5.5 years altogether before returning to New York in fall of 2021.
So for quite a few years, you were kind of doing a similar role as an international picture editor in Hong Kong. But at some point, you started to pick up your camera again, and this is kind of what I want to lead into about your
Yeah.
your latest photographic work
Mm.
about Hong Kong. I wonder, can you tell us what was that? Why did you feel the need to pick up the camera again and start taking pictures? Because I always think as a photographer, it never leaves you. I can never, even if I leave my cameras at home and go out for a walk wherever I'm traveling, I'm always kind of thinking about photos. You can never actually turn it off. And since you were a kind of a photographer first, I suppose you couldn't really turn it off. And maybe some of those ideas and thoughts about taking pictures started to creep back into your mind when you're in Hong Kong, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, the first years all of the 5 years in Hong Kong were very busy. I was covering 25 countries, including China and India,
Wow.
which is
Okay.
make up third of the world population, and the job was very demanding. A lot of assignments, uh, flood of stories, I would say, and it was like 2017 Rohingya exodus, all sorts of big breaking news events like Sri Lanka Easter attacks, Christchurch
Yeah.
terrorist attacks, and all earth what feels like countless earthquakes and other kinds of big news events. But obviously the biggest one was the 2019 Hong Kong protest, pro-democracy protest, which we covered heavily, but also it was a kind of interesting experience that we also lived through that protest,
Of
because I was
course.
living in the city that I would
Yeah.
finish my job, and then I would be like, how do I gonna get home, because I think there's not checkpoint, but like some sort of street blockades that I can't take the tram home, and it was
Yeah.
very intense several months. But what really kind of led me to taking photos again is like during my time in Hong Kong, I started looking into kind of getting to like mid-century, 1950s, 1960s New York street photography, that which is obviously a million miles away from the kind of work that I edit at work, in the office. But I felt like I started to kind of outside the office, I kind of like started to enjoy looking at photography that wasn't really photojournalism, and work that was especially a bit kind of like experimental. There's a lot of these photographers who are part of the so-called like New York school of photographers, and I started looking at those people like Saul Leiter and Ernst Haas and Louis Stettner and Louis Fowler, and somehow the looking at their work, which was very different, and it wasn't always necessarily about specific things, or it wasn't any kind of documentary work. It kind of intrigued me, but also it felt like if I in the past had been worried that if I tried to be a photographer, I'm like somehow trying to play both teams, both photo editing camp and photographer camp. But then if I'm making images that are actually not that aren't for photojournalism, then it's kind of very different case.
Sure. Yeah.
That it's nothing like the work that I would edit from the photographers that I sign, but also end of 2019, I knew that New York Times was going to transfer me back to New York, and
Oh, right. Okay.
I thought actually that by spring, I thought that by sometime in spring of 2020 we would be leaving Hong Kong, and
Mhm.
I had really learned to love the city, and I had to. My first daughter had already been born there. Our second daughter was born later in 2020, but I think
Mhm.
the idea of kind of also that I would be leaving the city, that I think that really gave some sort of impetus to also to kind of to capture the city in my own way, not as any kind of photo essay or documentary project, but as my own kind of um, um, some sort of my own vision of the city. My wife was also in photography, and worked as a freelance photo editor at the time. She got me um, one of these like Fuji X100 rangefinder cameras as a, I think it was like
Oh,
a
quite
birthday or
small ones. Yeah.
birthday, or some, I think for Father's Day, or some sort of
Mhm.
present, and I think it was 2018, and I had kind of started shooting with that a bit as when we went on holidays and so on, but I
Okay.
wasn't doing it like in any kind of serious way. But um, um, then but I guess towards the end of 2019, so certainly then by soon as 2020, beginning of 2020, I found myself like really more eager to take photographs. And then with the final really kick was that in the spring of 2020, was the pandemic hit, and
Yes.
I was sent back home from the office, and I would do my job from home, and I would sometimes, especially in the beginning, I would not necessarily leave the apartment for several days at a time. And what I
Mm.
actually started doing, was to make images from the bedroom or the living room window of an
Oh,
area
really?
next
Okay.
to a
Like
long bed.
the movie Rear Window. I can't remember the
Yes,
actor
yeah,
where he sits there
Jimmy
observing his
Stewart,
community.
yeah, yeah.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
actually, in the end of my book, I have like I've written this short text where I put down that I kind of felt like I was
Yeah.
Jimmy Stewart in Rear Window, which was really like
Mhm.
kind of being inside an apartment and kind of just observing from a distance, and I those were the kind of images that I made in the beginning, and but then I also started and then in the evenings I would kind of started roaming the streets and take photographs of quiet, empty city, and then it just kind of turned into this you know obsession almost again. Like I found myself really, as I often get into things that I was like,
Yeah.
I really enjoy this, and just the process of being on the streets and making those images, and 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 I mean, I wasn't really knowing. I didn't really know what I was doing, or what was the aim for it. But I just felt like I really, maybe it was partly saying farewell to Hong Kong, but also saying it was a relief during the pandemic, especially in the early days of the pandemic,
Mm.
to kind of like working from home, not seeing my colleagues, and then like being out on the street was that kind of a uh, was sort of kind of relief from
Sounds
that.
like it was a combination of all these different internal and external factors, whether it was your wife giving you the camera or the political situation, the COVID pandemic. It was
Mm.
all these kind of things that and your deadline to be leaving Hong Kong. It kind of all
Mm-mm.
came together. And then also you speak to that something inside you that kind of compels you to
Yeah,
keep going. When you get that idea that for a story or a project, I think a lot of photographers could
yeah,
probably identify that. It's like
yeah,
this worm that you in your head, you can't shake it, and
yeah,
it kind of takes over. And it's it's led to this book, which I really want to talk about,
yeah.
Hong Kong, which is bringing all of those photos together into
Mm.
your first book.
Yeah. So I started making those. The first image, I think it's made February 2020, of the images that ended up in the book, and the
Hmm.
last one was in June, sometime end of June 2021, just before we left Hong Kong. So what actually ended up happening is that because of the pandemic, we couldn't make the transfer to New York. So it actually the transfer ended up taking over a year and a half. So
Okay.
ultimately I ended up having a lot more time in Hong Kong, which actually, in hindsight, was very much a lucky strike, because
Yeah.
I don't think the book would exist if I we would have left Hong Kong April 2020,
Wow,
but
okay. Yeah.
and obviously it wasn't until several months into the if I say now I can say project. It wasn't a project back then. It was just making images, but I think after several months into it, only after several months into it, I started feeling that, hang on, I think I'm doing something here that, you know, is something bigger, that I, you know, I want to do something with this. And actually there was a photographer called Anthony Wallace who worked for AFP in Hong Kong, who choked on several occasions when I posted some of these images on Instagram, like dude, you know, if you ever make a book, I'll buy it, and which was kind of a, you know, partly also gave me I think, you know, the idea that maybe that's something that I want to do. And I would say that from the summer of 2020 onwards, I very much worked with that goal in mind. That you know, I don't know exactly how I didn't know that I had still had a year in Hong Kong, but I thought, like, whatever time I have left, I'll try to spend as much time as possible making these images, and, you know, hopefully by the time we're done here, then I have enough to, you know, make a book. And that's where the work comes from.
That process that you just described is really interesting, and also I think very useful for other photographers, in that you didn't immediately start out with a book project in mind, but there was something about, you know, I suppose you got one image that you were really happy with, and then that became 2 images, and then 3, and it kind of built into something. And someone made a comment online about a book, and suddenly this idea just formulates. And then, you know, even though you didn't start with a specific plan, you never know where these projects can take you. If you have a, you know, really strong connection to a project, or you're really, you know, passionate about it, you never know quite where it might take you. In a similar way to your career in general, I think, you know, you started out with photojournalism links, but it's turned into, you know, this career. Similar with the Hong Kong book, you just felt this urge to, for all these different reasons, to start the project, and then it became something bigger than probably you thought about when you first started going out. I mean,
in some ways, I've never really made, you know, I've never made like big plans, or like I've never made 5-year plans of what this is what I want to do, and this is what I want to be in 5 years. I've always kind of, like, you know, I wanted to study international relations. I found myself in Scotland studying that. I saw this war photographer documentary, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna try, you know, I don't know what's the way to start it. I'm gonna start a photojournalism degree, and you know, and then suddenly, you know, I as I said, like, I did the blog, and then I turned into photo editing, and then well, I'm moving to US, and then I do that, you know, I'm there a couple of years, and then we, you know, obviously, like, moving to Asia was another big change, but I was like, and grateful for my wife Veronica, was willing to make these moves with me, that, you know, and then we moved to Hong Kong, and that I think, you know, you have to kind of do what you want, and put, I mean, you have to put everything into the passion that you have, and I think, you know, so you kind of have to be, I think, well, I certainly feel like for myself, you have to, I guess I've been always kind of a narrow-minded or single-minded, and that's has kind of worked for me in some ways. Obviously now with you know, family and 2 kids, you know, you can't just be kind of as impulsive as before. But like but ultimately, you know, I think, you know, I didn't, when I wanted to make the book, or we decided that I want to make a book, it wasn't, I didn't know why it was, or what that really entailed, or what, you know, I thought, like, I really got into photography books, and I thought it would be incredible to have my own, you know, book of my own, with my images and my you know, my pictures of Hong Kong, and you know, obviously now that it's out, I want, you know, people to see it and get it out there, but it's, you know, I'm not, I very much like my photo editor job, and I'm not like, you know, packing that side up. That
you know. You're not abandoning the photo editing world just yet.
You know, but it's it's become, taking photographs has become a really important part of my life again, and I've continued that also here in New York, and it's kind of my hobby. It's kind of, maybe somehow nuts that I both work, as a photo editor, and then my hobby is kind of this photography this photography I make on my own, but it's kind of like a live and breathe photography in many ways.
Sure. Well, you were very kind enough to send me a copy of the Hong Kong book here to Beijing, and I was looking at it this week, and what really struck me, because I'm a kind of a photo fan myself, and I've got a pretty extensive photo book collection, and the first thing when I started looking through these images was I started to think about one book in particular in my collection, and it's a book, Color Photography by Ernst Haas. So I was really, really interested to hear you mention that he was one of your influences, because I think that comes through in so many of the images, like this one that we have up on screen now. It's very much this surrealistic view on the world. It's not straight photojournalism like you might see in, as you said, in the New York Times or Time magazine. It's very much an impressionistic view on Hong Kong, and I absolutely love this approach to photography. And I loved the work that Ernst Haas did, and the way that he kind of viewed the world. And I see a lot of that when I look through the book and look through your images. I kept thinking, wow, this is like this is the Finnish Ernst Haas, a modern day Finnish Ernst Haas. It was I think the book is absolutely beautiful. And so the influences come through, but also there's a lot of very much your own perspective and your own view on Hong Kong. This image that I have on screen, I really, really like, because again, it reminded me of another image by René Barré. The image where the group of men, it's a black and white photo, group of men on the rooftop. And as soon as I saw that, I was like, wow, this is like a modern version of that picture in Hong Kong. So again, those influences come through, but you've put this really unique twist on it. And what I really enjoyed the most, and what I think is really comes through in the book, and what I wanted to ask you about a little bit more, and what makes the book so unique, is the editing in the book, because I think it comes through really clearly. Knowing you and knowing your background as a photo editor, there's this playfulness and this intelligence in the editing that it really jumped out to me. And I was flicking through the pages, and I was like, oh wow, that's really clever, or that's really impactful, the way that these two images have been paired together, like this this little layout. These two images appear side by side in the book. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that process, because I assume you did the editing of the book yourself, given your background. Is that right?
I did, yeah. If I may comment quickly on some of the influences, like I would say, I love Ernst Haas, probably one of my favorite photographers, and Saul Leiter, William Eggleston, Luigi Giri, all of these photographers I absolutely adore, and I think I've certainly have influenced. I've been hugely influenced by them, but I also hope that obviously that I've made something of my own out of those influences. That I'm not a tribute act in a way.
No, of course not.
But like Ernst Haas is the famous Life magazine essay, the first color photo essay in Life magazine, the images from a magic city, which was basically his images from New York, of these impressionistic images. I think you used the word, which I I think his images of New York were like that, and it was trying to kind of see things new and anew, and that's what I was very much trying to do with my Hong Kong images, kind of not like try to kind of capture even kind of normal things or kind of everyday things in a new light and interesting light, and seeing something extraordinary in the mundane and so on, which obviously many photographers do in their own ways, but like William Eggleston and is kind of master in it too. And but those definitely those, you know, the influences, I think they inspired me often to get in the street, if it's even if I kind of felt like I was in a creative slump, and then I would look at,
Mhm.
I was literally for a couple of years I traveled with these two little books, one by Ernst Haas, one by Saul Leiter. There's these like photo file books that
Okay,
are
yeah.
like collection, you know, that I think Thames and Hudson publishes them, where they have like, you know, portfolio of 50 or so images from one photographer, and they're really tiny, like A5 size
Mhm.
books, and I would literally have them in my backpack when we travel somewhere, and I would always be inspired by just looking at their work, and I would you know, it would somehow seep into my work too, and so the influences, I think we all need that kind of heroes, and then it's just a matter of making something of our own out of those influences. But and I'm really glad that you brought up the editing. I did indeed do that myself, and I put a lot of effort into it. So, and I'm glad if that comes through. You know, it was very important for me to, um, you know, obviously to have the best images. They're not necessarily the main sequence of the book have 66 images, and I wouldn't say that they're necessarily the 66 best images in the book
Mhm.
of my all of my Hong Kong work. I mean, certainly there's, I like to think that there should be the strongest images there, but you know, the very strongest are included, but it's also, there's, I think, images that are there to kind of make a certain whole, and um, you know, it was very important for me that each image kind of relates to, I mean, there's certain images that are paired as, you know, kind of diptychs, but then there's also some images that are, you know, single images in the spread, but I still always build it in a way that it's one kind of entire sequence, that where each image has somehow connected to the one before and the one coming after, and you know, and there's obviously, you know, different kind of connecting factors, sometimes the shape
Mhm.
or color or an object or something like that. But it was very important to me that there was this, you know, kind of a flow in the edit. Which, I mean, there's a lot of photo books that I love, where I love individual images, but then I see the you know, the images aren't really, I think, edited, in my opinion, terribly well, or like I don't really see necessarily a logic in the editing, and I felt like that, at least I, you know, I don't know if my logic makes sense to everybody, but that was, you know, it was very much, the editing was, as I think, a big, as big part of, or a very big part of the whole bookmaking process, you know, beyond just, you know, obviously, than make, you know, than making the images themselves. That, and you know, it wasn't until well over a year after returning to New York that I really started editing it. So, you know, we got to New York. We had spent some time in Finland and Venezuela, where my wife's from, and it was like fall of 2021. We got to New York, but then it wasn't until a year later, like fall of 2022, and I was thinking like, what? So what happened with that book project, Mikko? And
Mhm.
and um, and then I started going through, you know, all the my hard drives and the several thousand, you know, images that I had from Hong Kong, and then I, just like with I described in the beginning of when I take, you know, get a body of work from a photographer from assignment, I keep
Mhm.
narrowing down. So I would go from thousands to couple thousands to several hundred, to, you know, couple hundred, and you know, tightening, and you know, it wasn't until I into like less than 100 that I kind of then started seeing like what could be the sequence here, and actually, I mean, not to compare myself to Robert Frank, but I'm a big fan of the Americans, and
Mm.
I
Of course.
and you know, I mentioned this target number that I often set for myself when I editing work stuff at work, and I noticed that, you know, Robert Frank's Americans has 83 images, so I was like, I'm gonna
So you
have I'm gonna have
aim for
83 in my
83 as
book.
well.
So that was the target number that I kind of tried to, you know, just to keep myself working towards that goal and narrowing down, and then I made a sequence of like 80, so I think it was 83 images, and
Mhm.
then, and you know, I showed it to my wife Veronica, who actually, you know, picked out a dozen images, um,
Mhm.
and which she felt like should come out, because, you know, there was, you know, some other repetitive or not strong enough or so on, and
Okay.
you know, I was really grumpy for her for one night, and you know, how dare you tell me to take images out, but actually I did take those out, and I think the work is stronger as a result of that. So big thanks to her. And then it was ultimately when I kind of like let go of my silly goal of 83. And I took a couple more images to ended up in this number of 66. And then there's two full bleed images at the one at the beginning and one at the end. So there's like 68 images total. But like the main, what I really matters to me is the main sequence, which is the 66 images. And I really, come to kind of get to that number, but also then to really, I spent days, many long late nights, working on that sequence and like putting that puzzle together of like, and obviously putting a puzzle together is like, okay, this works here, I would like, but then you lose some other connection. So it was, you take from somewhere else and you kind of play against yourself a bit. It's like, in some ways,
it's such a fascinating process, and you can take it many different ways. I mean, I suppose if you, for example, hired a photo editor to edit the book, they would have done it in
without a shadow of doubt. And I was kind of, like I said in the beginning, that I've noticed that not all photographers are best editors of their own work, and I did think that whether I should actually let somebody else edit my work, but I felt like if I'm a photo editor by profession, I need to try to do it myself. And also like I also felt like I have this vision of how it should be. I mean, I didn't know exactly how it was going to be, but like kind of like bluntly, how I should want it to be. So I was like, I need to do it myself, and I'm happy how where I got to. I'm sure there's you always second guess yourself a bit of and I'm actually, there's going to be a second edition of the book, so I made one small change to it, but actually it's not even, it's a moving book, one photograph on one pair to a page before, but it's not, doesn't even, the overall sequence is still sacred at that stage, but it's just like moving one image, and that kind of bugged me, which I felt like didn't quite pair with the image where I put it next to their first edition. But I really enjoyed the editing process of that and of this work, and I'm glad that you mentioned the editing, because I feel like that to me was what really makes a book from just a collection of images. And I kind of like thought of the work as a kind of a journey through Hong Kong, not a journey that is kind of covers the the most obvious landmarks or sites, but it's kind of my impression of Hong Kong and my journey, and it's there's some aspect of this, that farewell that I knew that I was leaving, but also of just like the joy of seeing and being on the street and capturing things anew, and not having to in the office, I'm always thinking, I always deal with images that are very much about something, and that I kind of let go with that with my own work, that there has to be some sort of a meaning, and I mean, in the beginning, and I very much struggled with it, like, why am I taking picture of this thing that what is it supposed to mean? But then I was like, I want to take it. It drew my attention. I'm just going to take the picture and not worry about it later. And I still kind of struggle with a bit with the whole, like, what is the work about? But it's about, like, I hope everybody gets their own experience. Everybody gets something different from it, I imagine. But I think it's exactly. I would imagine that people enjoy individual images, but also get some sort of a sense of the whole, and that
I think there's a beauty in that subjective view of, you know, the photographs when you look at them, that my experience of looking at these images and the sequencing of the images will be different to how other people experience those images as well. So, and I think there's, you know, real value in that, and I think there's real beauty in that as well. It doesn't have to always be, you know, straight photojournalism style photography. I think there's, you know, even, you know, photographs shot in this style, in this abstract impressionistic way, can speak to important issues and can speak to like the identity of Hong Kong and what Hong Kong is, and, you know, what it was in the past and what it might be in the future. And there are all these suggestions of the city and ideas about the city in these photographs in the book. And I think the way that you've sequenced them, and I brought up this little selection of images which appear pretty much, I think that pretty much in sequence as in the book. I think there's one image that's just before the other, but just like this little sequence I really enjoyed, with you have the plane flying against the blue sky, which leads into the birds flying in the window, and then you have the shapes of the window in this image echoed in the windows of the next image, and the lady takes you onto this lady dancing. Again, we have the shapes, and then the hands from the dancer with a hand in this little kind of wooden puppeteer hand. Just these little sequences in the book, I think, are lovely. And I think they are what makes the book really unique. And like you said, it's not just a collection of photographs, which you do see in a lot of photo books. I found with this book, there are all these little Easter eggs in terms of the sequencing.
Right.
And so when you find them, it's kind of like you can see them and you piece them together and you're like, that's why he sequenced it like this. You're leading the viewer very subtly on this journey through your Hong Kong. And I think that's, personally, I think that's one of the most unique things about this book. And it takes you on your own personal journey. I'm sharing the journey with you, but also I've got my own feeling and perspective on the collection as a whole. And again, that's what I think makes the book really unique.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind. And I mean, I've been fortunate enough to get some good press for the book, but and which I'm very happy about. But not many summer articles have necessarily talked about the editing, which I think, you know, as I said, it's a very big part of the book.
That surprises me, because that's what really jumped out at me the most. It's a pleasure when you notice it, when you start to notice those things, something clicks and you view the story and the images in a completely new way. So, you know, bravo, Mikko. I really love the book.
Thanks, Sean.
But I want to know, is there going to be a sequel?
I very much hope so. So, you know, pretty much as soon as we got to New York, I started making photographs here. I mean, I don't have quite as much free time as in Hong Kong, and or like, you know, and during Hong Kong also what gave me a lot of time during the 18 months was that when I had vacations, and we wouldn't, because of the pandemic, we couldn't leave Hong Kong. So, you know, we were there so yeah, I started taking photographs in New York as soon as we got here, and basically, you know, the last 2 years and a bit to 2.5 years, I've been taking photographs, and I would very much hope to make my next book about New York, but I feel like I'm not quite there yet. I think with this New York book, you know, I need, you know, probably another year or, you know, sometime next year at least to have enough kind of work to have enough strong work to make a book. Sure. But I very much hope, and I don't know, I have had this idea to do like a city trilogy, Hong Kong, New York, and for some reason I really would love to photograph Los Angeles. I've only been there once for like a few days. I've never lived there, but and obviously, you know, with Hong Kong, it was a book about a city where I lived, and now if I'm fortunate enough to make a book about New York, it's a city where I live and I spend a lot of time. So I don't know, how could I pull it, you know, Los Angeles book if I don't live there. Maybe I'll try to get transferred there or something. But I very much would love to do a New York book, and you know, I think I have certain amount of images that I'm very happy about, but I also want to keep, I feel like I need to keep working on it before it's ready for really prime time. And I haven't edited. Currently I'm still just making images whenever I can, and then I'll, once I feel like, maybe I have enough to work with, then I'll start editing. So I haven't like really worried about the editing. Although sometimes when I take images, I'm like, okay, I think this could maybe actually pair with something that I just took a couple of weeks ago or something like that. That I now I've kind of started noticing that that I also have that mindset, which maybe makes me, think that I'm getting closer to having, body of work. But lost the LA one, I don't know, but like one step at a time. But hopefully I can make the New York book happen. That'd be really
Sounds
awesome.
exciting.
And what makes it
to seeing
interesting to
those.
be shooting in New York is that I feel like I've kind of come to the home ground of my heroes, where Ernst Haas shot, where
Yeah.
Saul Leiter shot, and a lot of those people whose work I've looked at, and the Harry Callahans and so on, and and try to, New York is, in a way, it's I feel like there's photographs everywhere, but it's also a city that is very photographed, and to really try to make your own work, make your own mark is very difficult. But at the same time, I think like I love this Ernst Haas quote called, "I'm not interested in seeing new things. I'm interested in seeing things anew."
Yeah.
So that I've taken plenty of images at Times Square and Statue of Liberty and all of these, and Empire State Building and Brooklyn Bridge that everybody photographs. But I think there's always a way to see those things in my way. Nobody can see exactly like I do. I'm not saying that it's a better way than others, but it's mine, and that's all I have. And I hope that once I have enough work, it's gonna be in New York that is really, it's my New York, my impressions of the city.
Yeah.
And not just something that obviously everybody's kind of photographed in a way, the same subject matter.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Like we talked about, it's important to have those people who influence your perspective and your art, but at some point you let go of that and you forge your own path and find your own way of seeing the world.
Well, I've kind of I feel like like I said, I've never really planned my own life or career very closely. So I've kind of, just kind of done things with passion and ended up taking these different steps. And I think that's the first thing, is to, if you're really passionate about photography, just pour your heart and soul into it, and familiarize yourself with the work that has been done before. I think you need to know it and see what you like. And I look at sometimes some really great work and of photographers who I really admire, but I'm like, I love this frame, but I don't like that one. And I try to kind of take things from the things that I like from everybody's work, or there's photographers I really don't like, but then they have certain frames that just like there's something that I I get from it. And so look at a lot of work, and I think you'd really trains your eye, and not only just like obviously photography, movies and painting and art and visual arts in general, but I look at a lot of photography, both. I mean, obviously, I look at photojournalism at work, the work that I edit, and I read. But I have quite a lot of photo books now, and I love looking at them and just familiarizing myself with what's been done before, and analyzing images and really thinking, trying to kind of dissect what makes me like certain images, and then trying to kind of take lessons from that. And I mean, obviously photojournalism, photography, it's there's different types of photography, but like photojournalism, if we're talking about that as an industry, it's a tough one to break into and tough one to make a living. So it's feel ready to diversify and look at other streams of income to also support yourself while you're like really doing the work that really is most meaningful to you. I guess I'm when it comes to my own photography, I guess I'm in the fortunate position that I don't really, I don't have any financial pressure. I'm completely free man in the sense that, I have my day job that, pays
Sure,
the salary,
yeah.
and I'm fortunate that I love that job, but also
There's nothing wrong with that path either. Having
no,
that security
yeah,
and
no,
doing
yeah,
photography on the
no.
side.
And and I think there's there's a lot of photographers who actually great photographers who done
You've taken that approach, yeah.
and there's like street photographers like Fred Herzog who had, I don't remember what was his profession, but he just did the photography completely on his as a hobby, and now he's like really like one of the very celebrity street photographer, color photographer, and after his death, but it's it was just a kind of passion that he did, but and there's other people who have those whether it's teaching positions or something else, teaching photography or and so on, and what is sad is when you see that young people enter the industry and then kind of disappear when they get married and want to start a family because they can't make a living, and they'll be like, okay, I need to support my family, I'm gonna have to do something completely else. So but I think if you kind of like speaking to a a young person just starting out, I think it's important to or early career photographer to kind of, if you start planning way ahead that this is going to be tricky path to make it work, but it's ultimately very satisfying if you can make it work, but you have to be kind of be willing to navigate different paths, make, I guess, certain compromises, would be willing to make certain compromises to to make sure that you can make it viable in the long run, because
it's a complicated path. I think we could do a whole nother podcast just on
I mean, there's less and less complications
navigating
and
in photography. Well, but that advice is really good. I think following what you're truly interested in and passionate about photographing, and then being open to the opportunities that might come as that project develops and flourishes. I think that's really important advice for photographers who are listening and watching. So, Mikko, we've taken enough of your time. I want to say thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. And what I'd like to do before we leave is just encourage people. Where can they get the book now, Mikko? Because I think I spotted it on Amazon and on the Kera website. What's the best places for people to get the book?
Well, yeah, it's on Amazon, and I think the first edition is now largely sold out. I don't know if Amazon has some copies, but certainly the publisher has told me that they're out of the first edition copies, but they just printed a second edition, which should be available, I think, in August, so in a few weeks' time. So in the US, Amazon is a good place to get it. I'm hoping that it would, it will also be in some of the, bookstores, physical bookstores, which I certainly love, and but in EU, I think Kera is a good place to get it. At least in the EU area, they will deliver from their warehouse. I know that there's like, I've been trying to see like where it was very important for me to, for instance, to know that it's available in Hong Kong. So I know that like Blue Lotus Gallery in Hong Kong stocks has it in their stock, and there's a gallery called was it Mooncat in Taiwan that has it, and there's, I think with a bit of Googling you should be able to find hopefully
people will be able to seek it out.
Yeah, and hopefully with the second edition out, it'll be and the fact that there's been a bit of press, hopefully we'll get it distributed even wider than the first one. Okay,
Mikko, thank you so much for joining me today. I really, really enjoyed that conversation. I think there's so much to learn for everybody who's been listening and watching. And I wish you successful shooting in New York and maybe LA. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the sequel to the Hong
Thanks,
Kong
Sean.
book.
This was fun.